Welcome, welcome, everybody. We're just going to wait a minute or two for people to log into Zoom. There's a small group of us today, about 10 to 15, depending on who shows up. I'm going to go over real quick how Zoom works. I'm going to ask everybody to keep themselves on mute until you want to ask a question. If you want to ask a question and it's a moment to ask, then just go ahead and jump in, or you can raise your hand and we can call on you. But we're going to leave this kind of open so that it's more of a conversation rather than a presentation. We have a PowerPoint we will move through, but we wanted to have this class so it was really a resource for everybody. And we want to answer your questions and make you feel comfortable thinking about, probably selling your piece of property. Is there anybody here that's not in Brooklyn or New York? You can raise your hand or put it in the chat. Do you guys know how to use the chat? I'm going to write in the chat so people can find the chat. Here is the chat. So if it popped up there, you can put some questions there in the chat. If you hit participants and you find yourself, that's where you can mute and unmute yourself. Turn your video on and off. So like I said, everybody just stay muted unless you want to ask a question. And I like that some people have their cameras on. Hi guys, how's it going? I'm gonna wait 1 or 2 more minutes. Does anybody want to introduce themselves? Besides us, we'll definitely introduce ourselves, but anybody here? Hi Heather, hi other person I can't hear you talking if you're talking. You have to unmute yourself.
Hi, I'm Laura.
Hi Laura, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Are you in New York?
Yeah, I'm in Brooklyn.
Heather, I still can't hear you, even though you hit. Oh, there we go. Now I can hear you.
Hi, I'm Heather. This is my husband, Darryd.
Derek and Heather?
Yeah, Darryd. It's like Jared with a D.
Cool.
Yeah. Yes.
That's the first. I deal with a lot of names from work, and that's the first time I've heard that name, and I like it.
Thank you.
Terrell, I think I'm saying that right. Do you want to introduce yourself? Okay. Well, I'm Victoria Alexander. I almost said Hagman. My maiden name is Hagman. And I'm the founder and owner of Realty Collective, a company that I started 15 years ago to sort of defy the stereotypes associated with real estate brokers. So far, I think I've done a pretty good job. And I worked with Rashida for at least a decade because she helped me buy my house. She was my lawyer when I bought my house a decade ago. And we have been, for the last 10 or 15 years, having this class called Buying into Brooklyn. We used to do it in person. And we're a resource for buyers thinking about entering into the buying process and giving them lots of information about, thinking about buying a piece of property, because it can be overwhelming and intimidating, just like selling a piece of property can be. So this is the first time we're actually doing selling in Brooklyn. But I think that is material we know very well because we're doing it all the time, especially Rashida. That's her #1 thing that she's focusing on. I focus on buying, selling, and rentals, mostly residential, but all over Brooklyn. I only do Brooklyn. But she's doing selling for buyers and sellers every day. So I'm going to hand it over to Rashida to introduce herself really quick.
Hi, everyone. Rashida Sadiq, partner in the firm Serpico Sadiq. I practice real estate. I've been practicing for roughly going on 18 years now, so it's been quite some time. Licensed in both New York and New Jersey. Can't count how many clients I have represented in both sale transactions and purchase transactions, as well as when they're buying and selling at the same time. Currently have about 7 of them going on right now where clients are buying and selling, and we're in the process of getting them scheduling closings and things like that. So I kind of always joke that I sleep and breathe real estate. Sometimes that's funny because I'm waking up in the middle of the night and I'm like, did I do this? Who am I scheduling this week? And just representing clients throughout. But I love what I do and work with Victoria over the years. So look forward to going through the process with you guys and any questions you may have.
I have to unmute my own self. So there's a couple more people joined. Thank you for joining us. I went over really quickly just how to use Zoom a little bit. If anybody needs help, just put it in the chat if you can find that. But there is a little button there at the bottom of your Zoom screen that says chat, and you can ask questions there if you don't want to raise your hand or ask them out loud. But this is where, there's a small group of us. I think now we're at like 10. So, feel free to jump in if there's a moment where you see fit to just ask any questions you have. I want this to be more of a conversation than a presentation. So don't feel intimidated by asking us questions in the middle of any of this. And but also we'll stay on as long as you need at the end to answer questions also. So with that note, I'm going to get started unless anybody wants to chime in now. So we already introduced ourselves. These are the glamour shots for Rashida and I.
I like.
Me too. So I'm going to kick it off with talking about why sell now. One of the best reasons to sell right now is that you want to take advantage of the really low interest rates to buy something else, and you want to trade up. You've been a homeowner for 5 to 10 years. You realize there's some challenges with your space. You've outgrown it. And because of COVID, you're spending a lot more time there, and you can afford to have a bigger space. You're going to sell the space that you're in now. You're going to get a better space. Your property's in high demand. You own something that has 2,000 square feet of outdoor space and a washer, dryer, and a dishwasher. You should think about selling possibly in Brooklyn, especially if it's in Brooklyn, because those are the kind of properties people are looking for. And another reason you might want to sell is you're ready to move out of New York City. Are there reasons that you might sell that I didn't mention? Anybody have another motivation for selling? Do you want to chime in, Heather? I see a maybe.
We also work in Midtown, and public transportation has been getting worse and worse since we've been out here in Brooklyn. And we are considering needing to be closer to our jobs.
You're going in for work?
Well, not since Broadway shut down, no. But before that, yes.
You're working in theater?
Yeah. Well, not right now, obviously. So normally, yes. Yeah.
We're very well connected to that world. Tina that works here also works at the Dramatists Guild. So, okay. Is there any other reasons that besides the commute that anybody might be thinking about selling right now that I might have missed? Okay. I'm going to move on then. Then after you've considered that, there's some other considerations you should make. Is your property what people are looking for? Which I had mentioned before, which is outdoor space. Is it in the easy parking area? Because parking is a high demand right now. Maybe it's because school's no longer a preference for you because school's all online, so you don't have to, or your kid's already in the right school district, so no reason to stick around. And or any COVID things that might be challenging your life right now.
I've had some clients, Victoria, that are, parents, they're moving closer to parents, or they're taking in,
right, moving closer to family. Like
yeah.
Well, that's what brought up is like leaving New York. Is it time to go back to your, where you're from and be closer to friends and family that would be a better support system or,
Or also having them come and live with them, so they need bigger spaces. So they may have a parent that's going to be moving in with them shortly because of that, just those type of things as well.
So the next thing that I like to have people think about when they're considering selling is thinking about if they've actually held your property long enough to see a return on your investment, or if you'd be selling at a loss. So calculating your appreciation, and this is something that we going to rely on Rashida for talking about, sort of your closing costs on both ends. So when you bought the place, you had closing costs, and when you sell, you'll have closing costs. If that's $100,000 and your property only appreciated $50,000, you might be taking a loss for when you're selling. But if you've held it long enough, which the rule of thumb for New York anyway is about at least 5 years, give or take. Every property is different, obviously. But that's really the number that makes the most sense when we're encouraging people to buy, is that they need to feel committed to owning the property for 5 years. Then obviously there's the realtor commissions, capital gains to think about. These are all finances that you need to consider when selling your property. Anything to add there? Sorry.
Yeah, just regarding when you calculate, and one thing that I do as a seller's attorney is give an estimate of the closing costs, whether the client is contacting me prior to just putting it on the market or when we're about to sign the contract. A lot of them have to think about capital gains. How long have you owned the property? Has it appreciated so much that you may potentially have some capital gains implications? And you may not, the capital gains isn't due when you sell the property, but when you do your taxes for that year. So we try to go over that with them. There's exemptions if it was your primary residence. If you've been renting a portion of it, there may be exemption as well. But I think the 5-year mark is kind of a good mark as well, because for capital gains, if it was your primary and you lived in the property for 2 out of the 5 years, you have a $250,000 exemption. So I have clients that are purchasing and selling, and sometimes they ask, well, I'm purchasing another property. Can I just, is there no capital gains because I'm using all of the money to go towards that next transaction? And I say, it depends, because you may be using all of the funds, but you have to figure out what your purchase price was, what your closing cost for your sale was, how long you've owned the property, and they don't account for your mortgage payoff. So you still always want to think about capital gains as well, because that is some money that you want to set aside in case you do have a capital gains on the property, especially if you have it for a lot of years and it's really appreciated.
And if it's not your primary, are people doing a lot of 1031 exchanges right now?
Yeah, so clients have, sometimes they have a combination. So let's say they have a 2-family. They've been renting out one of the units and the other they've been living there. So they may want to do what we call as a 1031 exchange to defer some of the capital gains, because they may not be able to use their primary residence exemption. So it's conversations like that you may want to consider, because you may want to sell an investment property and upgrade to maybe a 3-family. And then you have capital gains in those instances as well, because it was investment property for a portion of it. Or you have a condo and you were renting out your condo because you moved out a couple of years ago. So that now you're looking to sell it. Now it becomes your investment property. So definitely to think about ways 1031 exchange for investment properties and deferring that capital gains.
So any other questions about thinking about the potential return on investment for your property and calculating all your closing costs to make sure that you are meeting the threshold to not be taking a loss? Anybody?
And I also laugh and say that when you're buying, New York City takes their money, and when you're selling, New York City takes their money. So you have that transfer tax that people are like, wait, I paid mortgage tax when I purchased, and now I got to pay the city to sell. And if I have a co-op, I also got to pay a co-op to sell. So definitely you want to sit down and kind of see those numbers, because you don't want to, have it on the market and then you realize you're only walking away with a little bit and you don't have that funds to either buy or upgrade or something like that.
So the next thing I like to have people think about when they're considering selling is, do you have a plan? Do you have a plan for what happens when this is no longer your residence, or that you no longer own this? Like I said before, for the 1031, that's a good plan for the funds, but if you're living, it's your primary residence, where are you going? Are you going to be buying something else? Do you need to sell this and buy something else at the same time? Are you going to be leaving New York? I have definitely met people that I didn't have, mistakenly early on in my career, did not have this conversation with people when they were listing, and then it came down to we're closing and they didn't know where to go, and they just had no plan whatsoever, and then they started having seller's remorse because they hadn't thought through to the future and what that looked like, and so they started having anxiety. What did they just do? Because you don't think about life afterwards sometimes, and then it can creep up on you, and all of a sudden it's there and you have to find a new place to go. So it's definitely make sure to think about your timeline. Do you want to be out of New York or out of this place in 3 months? or do you want to like try to get the most amount of money and you'll do it for a year and you want to, take the long road, but you have to have a plan for your expectations of what happens afterwards. Anybody want to add anything there?
Just that timeline, Victoria, as you mentioned, it really goes pretty quickly. People don't realize once you sign that contract, you can be closed within 30 to 60 to 90 days. So you have to, figure out where you're going after that, whether it's at renting or moving out of state and coordinated moves out. So that is definitely something you should be discussing with your realtor, Victoria, that I'm sure they will be discussing with you regarding that timeline of closing, because property, typically you turn over the keys when you get that money. So you have to be out.
Rashida used to say this, is that nobody wants to do a post-possession agreement. So if everyone's like, well, can I rent back from the buyer for a little bit so I can get my stuff together? Lawyers do not approve that scenario. It's so unlikely. And Rashida will tell you not to ever you can't do that.
Yeah, we really try to deter clients to do that. We're kind of like a last case resort. Like, for instance, I have clients that are buying and selling at the same time. So in that instance, there's, they have to, because they're closing within a day or two of each other. So we try to keep it short, but even then we have to realize you're not getting all of your funds on that day. So you have a potential of after closing having issues, and you really closing, you want to get your keys and move and get your money. Sorry, give over your keys, get your money, and get out of there versus having it linger off for like a month or two, because there's a bunch of other complications that comes up. But that's all about discussion timing, and then speaking with your attorney, speaking with your realtor on realistically what you can do. And then the stress of it as well. I'm sure Victoria was saying that, being under the car, like, where am I renting? Am I moving? It's stressful to move. So definitely have to take that into consideration. And buying and selling is stressful at the same time as well.
Yeah, I call it the emotional roller coaster that everybody's on. We're all on it together. But setting expectations and thinking through what your plan is really important. And the other part of it is that you really don't want your property on the market for a long amount of time. The longer it's on the market, the longer you're actually devaluing it. I like to say is like, okay, well, if you put something on overpriced, I try hardly ever to let anybody overprice their property. But if they've overpriced and we can't get anybody in there at this price, and then it's sitting them on the market, and then we drop, we're really probably selling less than we would have if we initially priced it correctly the first time. And it's important that you, one, list at the right amount, but also you don't let your listing linger, and that you're doing things to encourage and adjust to make sure that you're getting interest in it, because the longer it's on, you're really losing the value by letting it sit.
Hi, can I ask a quick question about that?
Sure.
What do you consider, I don't have anything on the market now, but I was just wondering what you consider to be a long period of time. Just because I see, I watch properties and I see people are making price reductions, some are not, but what do you consider to be something that kind of languishes a bit too long?
It's on the market now over 6 months. That seems like a long time to me. Anything that I see is on for a year is crazy. It's probably, and then makes me think certain things about the seller, that they're not serious about selling, that they're not in, their ideals are not in line with the market, and they're unrealistic. So educating that person really about expectations is like very important. If it's been on for 3 months and this time, everything's different during COVID. I should just lead with that everything is different during COVID. We can all talk about expectations and what things are like during normal times, but we've definitely been thrown into a time with that there's no precedent. Rashida and I talk about this in our buying class. We have been doing real estate during 9/11, during the financial crash of 2008, 2009, during Hurricane Sandy. So we're definitely used to, or not used to, we've definitely worked during those situations and gotten through them and been able to navigate and help our clients navigate these very stressful times. But this is very different. And the rental market over the summer was on fire for me here in Brooklyn. And now things are a little bit different. So every day, there are challenges, and just setting the expectation that we're in unprecedented times. So for me, 6 months to a year is a long time. In normal times, COVID, if they put it on in March, it's totally understandable why it could still be on the market if it's in Midtown Manhattan. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's helpful. I mean, I think, obviously the real kind of art to this is finding a good listing price. I mean, so far my experiences, I want to buy before I sell. And the few houses that I've looked at, they were priced. I don't know if the market would have, one went for more than the listing price and one went for less, but I encountered bidding wars.
Yep, there's a lot of bidding wars right now.
Yeah, the one that was,
go ahead, Laura, sorry.
yeah, the one that was below that drew a lot of people in. I mean, that was a strategy, and they got a lot of bids, and they said, okay, we're going to wrap up the showings in 5 days, best and final. But when it comes time to sell my place, I don't know if I put a number on that I think is on the lower end of a reasonable ask, whether it's going to elicit that type of bidding. It's worrisome because you can really go down in your pricing but not up. So
I think that understanding the comps and understanding we're going to talk a little bit about that, understanding who your buyer is and who you're marketing to, how to, that's a strategy that we've used during normal times, and I've definitely been using that strategy for certain types of property. I'm about to list a property that is in a neighborhood that there's similar listings up, and we're going to list at the lowest number in comparison to them to sort of undermine those properties that have been lingering and get interest. So I think you just have to have somebody on your team that you're hiring to sell that has really good marketing concepts and idea on how to orchestrate that sort of situation, because it's an art. And you want to make sure that they've done that before. So you shouldn't be scared if it's a strategy of underpricing. If it's underpriced, the market will tell you. And if it's overpriced, the market will tell you. So if you are worried that, you underpriced it and you're getting lower numbers, your underpricing strategy probably wasn't under enough. So does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I guess then, it just tells you that it's all dictated by buyers, because I mean, serious buyers, I guess you're saying, are informed about how to bid above ask. You just don't want to
if they have serious buyers have a broker. So serious buyers are educated about bidding wars because they have a real estate broker that's guiding them and showing them the value of the property. Bidding something $5,000 or $10,000 over asking right now, or even $20,000, because interest rates are so cheap, that ends up being like $5 to $15 a month over the 30-year mortgage. So, educating your buyer to make sure that they understand the value of actually having that property and the quality of life and everything that it checks all their boxes and getting them there, is part of the process too.
Okay.
Makes sense. Okay. Any other questions before we move on? Okay, moving on. Oh, wait, Heather and Derek?
I have a question. My wife and I have been talking about how we would like to find a real estate agency that would be helpful in helping us find our next place while we have the place that we currently have up for sale.
Okay.
And ideally, it would just sort of be this place sells and then we get the next place. And whether that next place is a rental or whether it's something we might be lucky enough to buy again, we're just wondering, can you talk a little bit about that? And do you have clients or have you had experiences where you're sort of working both ends of it? You're helping them sell, but you're also helping them get into something.
100%. So at the beginning of all this in February, I had a studio co-op that we were selling, and then I was helping the buyer find another piece of property. And they were also in the position where they didn't need to sell to buy the next thing, but they wanted to sell the other thing. So we were doing it at the same time. I have a lot of experience doing that. At the end of the day, she's still looking to buy, but we decided to rent out her place because the demand for her type of property had just diminished. She's in a co-op studio in downtown Brooklyn, and the building has lots of great shared space amenities, but nobody can use shared space amenities right now. And studios, when people want to live together, I think people are craving being with other people. So I think that the demand for buying a studio, even though there is a lot of value in buying right now for the younger generation and a studio might make sense, that there wasn't a demand in the market for it. So there was demand for rentals. And so we ended up renting her place so that because she had left the city at this point, wasn't sitting there empty. And we just pivoted her strategy so that she was making profit off of the place she owned, and that she was in a good position that when the right place came up, she could buy it. So I think it happens all the time, people buying and selling at the same time. And Rashida's done a lot of that as well.
And just to add to that, what about the dynamic right now about qualifying to get into another place? For instance, in our profession, we're kind of like we're on hold, we're on pause right now, and there's income coming in from some additional resources, but mostly it's the unemployment and the enhanced benefits that are helping us to survive. We are thinking about selling, but we also know that we need to make an impression on the new place that we're going to go. Either we're going to buy, need to set up a mortgage, or we're going to need to rent somewhere. And obviously, if we could sell this, we would have a chunk of money that would give us some real sort of credence wherever we wanted to go. But have you had clients during COVID here who are dealing with the enhanced benefit unemployment reality? That's their income right now, and they're still able to sell and find something to rent. And do you help in that area?
Rashida, it looks like you want to say.
So I've had some clients in regard to buying. Like right now, I have about 4 deals where the clients are buying and selling at the same time. They're selling their property and buying a new property, and they have been able to, we've been able to coordinate where we've made contracts contingent, which virtually prior to COVID, it was not very likely that buyers or sellers were even including a kind of contingency, a sale or purchase contingency. But I think a lot of people are being a lot more flexible now. So we're seeing that we're able to include type of a buy or a purchase contingency in some of the contracts. And then in the cases where my client has been selling, they've been able to work with their loan officer on their buy regarding the funds that are going to come from their purchase, from their sale, in order to maybe they're getting low, they don't need as much income because they're putting down more cash down for their purchase transaction. So it's just really one of the things that you're definitely going to want to have to speak with is a loan officer to just see what they can work around with your income and what they can use, because if you're going to be buying and selling at the same time. I did have one client that she's selling and she's moving into a rental property, and she was able to negotiate where, and that she's also in the creative industry, film, etc. And she was able to negotiate with them, paying her rent up front from the proceeds from the sale. And that was part of, like, it was a smaller building. It wasn't like, a bigger building, but it depends on the property, and the landlord was willing to do that. So yeah, there's different, you're just going to have those conversations, whether with, with the realtor to try to kind of get you, if you're looking at rentals or if you're looking at buys when you're putting in offers, and just explaining to them that it is a buy and a purchase transaction at the same time. These are the things, but it's one thing about it, the market is really kind of busy right now. So even the clients that were hesitant about doing it at the same time, they were able to get buyers right away. And everything, I tell clients, is amazing when you're buying and selling. It's stressful, but it kind of ends up working, everything ends up timing wise. And the main thing is that everyone was upfront from the beginning, as the buyer, as the seller. It's like a domino effect.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Normally we have, for the buying in the Brooklyn, we have a loan officer on the call that talks specifically about loans. We can connect you with Lisa, or, if you already have somebody you've worked with in the past, you should reach out to them and talk about your specific situation, because there are so many, intricacies and moving parts to it, that understanding before you make any decision what your capacity is to buy something from them would be really helpful. And like Rashida said, just putting down a larger amount of funds sometimes you know, normally people put down 20%, but if you were putting down 40 or 50% of your purchase and getting only financing from a bank 50%, but you had less income, they might be okay with that. But you really need to talk to somebody at a bank, because that is also something that's changing daily. The rates are holding, but all the different products and the rules around all of that is still, you know, changing on a regular basis. We're not where we were definitely in March and April for a lot of those scenarios. I was going to say something else. I think I forgot. I'll come back to it if I think. I would say that renting right now is a little bit easier. I was going to say, for what Rashida was saying, it'll all work out, all the timing and everything will work out because everybody's laying expectations. And honestly, ripping the Band-Aid off all at once instead of slowly pulling it for moving when you sold and then renting and then moving again. I mean, we all know how disruptive moving is to your life and how it can consume a huge amount of your time. And I think everybody really wants to be in their space and feel very comfortable. So doing it once, all at once, is probably I encourage people to do that instead of dragging it out over time. Okay, I'm gonna move on to, so you've decided to sell. Yay, exciting. Now what? Now you assemble your team. No matter what, you're going to need a real estate broker and an attorney. You cannot write contracts yourself. And I would say that you probably cannot sell your property as well as somebody else because of, you know, unless anybody here works in sales, it's going to be challenging, especially during what's going on right now with COVID. You need to be very aware and have your finger on the pulse of what's going on in the market. So find someone you like and know and trust, and that comes recommended to you. You're going to spend a lot of time with these people, so make sure you feel comfortable talking to them and that they make you feel comfortable. That's so, yep, here I already been said all this stuff. Navigating the COVID, some spelling changes, challenges and market shifts, understanding your neighborhood, home, and the assets of the sale. So making sure you are highlighting these things and understanding the market challenges that you're going to have to overcome to be competitive. Oops. Then figuring out how you market your property to buyers. I like to think of it as telling a story. So what story are you going to tell about your home or the space that you're selling? It's like crafting a beginning, closing, and end to the type of person. And I always like to say that it's probably whoever the owner of the property is 5 years ago. So your future self is going to, your past self is going to be your new buyer. They are at the same point in their timeline in their life where you were when you were purchasing this place, and we should be marketing and strategizing to reach that buyer. I already did this part. Can the broker that you hired tell that story? This is one thing that I like to point out to people is, you know, I'm happy to talk to anybody. I'm sure there's tons of people in here. I don't sell in Manhattan. I don't sell in the Bronx. I don't sell in Queens. I only sell Brooklyn because I know and love Brooklyn, and I can sell something that is very dear to me and I understand very well. I'm not going to do a good job trying to sell and convince someone why they should buy this house in Queens. That's just, so you want to make sure that the broker that you hired to sell your property relates to the product that you're selling, and that they are a good person to be able to sell that. I do an amazing job of selling Red Hook because I live here. I've lived here for a really long time. So it's easy for me to talk about how much I love living here and why people might like it or not like it, and be very real with people. Make sure that the person that you hire to be your broker understands your product and can sell it to your new buyer and the new owner. And here I have a note on staging. To stage or not to stage? Anybody have any feelings on virtual staging?
What do you think about staging? Is it?
Yeah, what do you think about virtual staging, guys? No comments?
I think when I look at listings that are virtually staged, they look false and they lack the warmth I'm looking for in something that's going to be a home.
I agree.
So I'm not a huge fan of it.
Me either. Anybody else? Virtual staging? So I think you can always tell, and it looks very computery and robot-y and sterile and doesn't have, you know, the life and the story of like what you're telling. And even if it's not somebody who's actually staging, I just staged a property this week. It was a lot of heavy lifting, literally. But I think that it's really difficult to sell an empty place. People, you know, not everybody. I know a lot of people have amazing imaginations, but I would say a blank apartment is hard for people to imagine people themselves in. And so sort of letting the staging create the story for you and help them see where everything would go and how they could use it is really helpful in the selling process. So don't underestimate the value of somebody staging your place and or making your place with your things in it look and sell a life that somebody wants to pay for. That's my notes on staging. Considering offers. So you have some offers in on your property. My one advice is always counter every offer. Even if it's a very low ball offer, I'm going to counter with full asking price, just to let them know, listen, I hear you. I'm thinking, like, ignoring them and ending the conversation doesn't get anybody anywhere. You want to move the conversation forward, so you want to counter the offer, even if it's at full asking. Always take your first offer very seriously. For me, that is 80% of the time the buyer. They've been looking for a while. They know what they want. They finally found your place. They're serious. Don't worry so much about leaving money on the table, but take the offer that comes in first very seriously, because that person usually is your buyer. And then if you do have COVID concerns with your buyer's finances or your finances or, you know, anything else that can be out of your control, Rashida's going to speak to this right now, but like you can put in some COVID considerations when accepting an offer.
Victoria, how do you deal with, I know I've seen it come up as an attorney, I normally get involved once the offer has been accepted, but sometimes we'll get an offer and then there's multiple bids. Or how do you advise sellers, you know, when you're waiting for that contract to be signed, or you get in multiple bids, you know, how do you go through a potential buyer to see that they're the right fit for this, whether it's financing, whether it's money they're putting down, whether it's closing dates? What kind of advice would you give a seller?
So, especially if there's a co-op involved, making sure that talking to anybody, any resources we have on the co-op board to make sure that and vet that person a little bit to the co-op board member, because knowing firsthand if this is like a red flag and we shouldn't be moving forward. I mean, you just don't want to go through that whole, co-ops, we all know there's a co-op interview and package. It's a much bigger lift than a condo or a house. And you want to make sure before you go through that very extensive process that this person's going to pass. So seeing if you can talk to anybody on the board and test sort of the waters a little bit there. Making sure that their job industry has stability and that they are committed. And I feel like having a good partner is the most important thing for me. I've done a lot of deals. Rashida, you've been my partner in this too, with other brokers, and having very frank conversations and having people that are straightforward and honest and say, okay, listen, I'm doing this. Are we going to make this deal? We're going to work together, and having these conversations so that, because we're a team and we all want to get to the end together, is really important. So I talked to the seller about my relationship with the buyer's broker. Are they answering the phone? Are they getting back to me? Do they seem nervous? Like, are there any red flags? That's why it's really important that you get a good lawyer too. Rashida, I wish you were this lawyer. I have this co-op deal in Brooklyn Heights. Love the buyer. The other broker is great. The lawyer has not responded to one email of mine. And we both represent the buyer. He didn't call me back ever. And luckily the deal is in contract, but I was like totally left out and couldn't advocate for her because he was not communicating with me. So I think really making sure that you're advising the seller on who the team players are and getting them to make sure that we're going to get not just into contract, but get to closing is important. So that's my one advice. And so when other offers are coming in and somebody has exercised and shown that they're going to be able, they want to and can get across the finish line, that has a lot of value right now. It is not just the $5,000 or $10,000 that are extra coming in these offers. Sarah, this morning, Rashida, we were at Sarah's inspection, and the other broker told us that another offer came in, $15,000 more than ours, but that they told those people that they're riding through with us because we have shown up at every step of the way that needed to happen in the last week once we got to accepted offer. So she was very straightforward about that. But Sarah over the weekend was worried that, is there a gentleman's clause that they're not going to I'm going to spend all this money on, I have to give Rashida a retainer and then I have to do the inspection and I'm spending all this money in the appraisal. How do I know that I'm going to spend $1,000 to $2,000 and that I'm not going to get outbid in the middle of the, after the accepted offer? So I think that's what I talk to sellers most about, is making sure that, sometimes it's not the money, that it's the guarantee that you have a team ready to make this happen, and they're committed to it. Any questions about any of that? Any other, have any things that you put in a contract for COVID now, Rashida? You have some COVID clauses?
We have a COVID-19 clause that we put in right now for both the seller and the buyer regarding extending the dates. So if both parties have a right to extend the closing dates and the time to perform, if we go into a situation where, we have to go into quarantine. And we also have clauses now that we say we can have remote closings because as a seller, your participation in the actual closing date when you're there is really about 15 to 30 minutes, and you're sitting there in a room with maybe 7 different parties, and really you don't want to do that. So we try to incorporate now, we have, as I said, extension of time periods to perform, both on the seller side and the buyer side, and then also, as I said, remote closings or pre-signing documents, etc. So those are the main 2 things that we do in the contracts now.
Documents needed, Rashida.
Yeah. So as a seller, you're thinking about putting your property on the market. And I said, I've been practicing 18 years, so I've been seeing a lot of sellers and things that can go crazy. And a lot of the times it's as you're thinking about it, also think about what do I need to get prepared for? And one of the things you want to, if you have a house, pull your deed, see if you have those documents, the documents that when you purchase the property, such as your owner's policy, your survey of the property. If you have a co-op, do you have a copy of your stock and lease? Do you have your mortgage information? If you refinanced in the last couple of years, do you have those documentations from the refinance? Did you pay off your loan when you refinanced? Do you have a copy of that satisfaction, or was it recorded properly? Because a lot of times, the more information you have when you're going into contract, and you can give to your attorney as a seller, if an issue comes up on title, I have my client's owner's policy. Yes, the seller, when they bought the property, had a mortgage, but it was paid off. We're not going to wait 60 days to get a new satisfaction. Here's your owner's policy. It can be omitted and we can close right away. Or we had a survey done at this time. So here's my client's survey. They have a copy of their certificate of occupancy. For stock and leases, same thing. We've had clients that, they refinance if they have a co-op and the bank put a lien on the property and never terminated it. So now it's going back to when they purchased it or when they had that refinance. And that holds up the closing as a seller because you have to give good title. You have to make sure that all of those issues that affect your property are cleared up before you can even get to a closing date. So as you start thinking about putting your property on the market, I say just, get all your paperwork. Put it to the side, and when you meet with your attorney or when you're meeting with your realtor, here's my documentation, here's my copy of my lease, here's my owner's policy, here's a survey. So the more upfront violations, if you have houses, if you did alterations to the property, those type of things, you want to just kind of have the paperwork together so you can take care of any issues before they become, because once you sign, you as a seller, you want to get to that date and hopefully get you closed. And especially if you're buying and selling, you don't want to have anything happen to your sale that would prevent you from buying or renting the next property.
So getting into contract is more of you, Rashida.
So we typically, as I said, I'll either have a client I have lots of old clients that come up now and they're like, oh, Rashida, we're probably putting our property on the market. I'm like, great. So let me know, maybe send me an email or a reminder once we're putting it on, we got some offers in, we're probably going to have an accepted offer in the next day or two. Because as an attorney, we come involved once your offer is accepted and we have to prepare the contract. And the main thing I'm always asking clients, do you have a copy of that stock certificate? So once I get the details of the accepted offer, we can turn around that draft contract within 24 to 48 hours, depending on if we have all the information we need. Also need to have conversations with clients. Are they buying and selling? Do you need to stay in the property for a short period of time? When are you realistically looking to close? If a client is selling their condo or their co-op, do they have all of the due diligence materials that they need to give to the realtor that needs to give it to the other side for them to do their due diligence, which is reviewing the condo or co-op documents, the financials, the budget, management contact information, your updated maintenance. So all of this is things that before you even sign the contract, all of that has to be taken care of prior to the buyer signing. Once the buyer's attorney has done their due diligence, the contract has been negotiated, then you sign it after the buyer signs it. So the more information we have up front and you've got those documentations, we can get you into contract. The time periods in the contract are really important in New York. It's an on or about closing date. So it's a 30-day grace period to close based on the closing date. So let's say we have November 15th is your closing date, on or about. Both the buyer and the seller have a grace period of 30 days. So you don't really have to close until December 15th, which you have to take that into consideration, which may be great because now you have some flexibility versus you're thinking November 15th is my closing date. That's the date. Do not move, do not schedule movers until you speak with your attorney. As a seller, I get a lot of clients that are like, hey, I scheduled a mover. November 15th is the date. No, they're still waiting on their bank clearance, or we're still, taking care of a title issue, or waiting on these information. So speak with your attorney, speak with the realtor regarding those timeframes. And we're realistic on your timeframes as well. And you have to let your attorney know. If you're thinking you're not going to be ready, I had a client that's selling and he's a teacher and he's doesn't want to move. Realistically, the closing could have been in November, but he doesn't want to close until December, and he doesn't want to close during the holidays. So we have to make sure that in the contract, we take that into consideration when we're scheduling, putting a date in the contract. And I was glad that he had that conversation with me and said, hey, Rashida, I know this is when we say we want to close, but thinking about my schedule, I'm not going to close during this time period. So I know up front, let's work with the other, this is how we need to frame the contract and putting that in the into the date. So definitely as a seller, it's about really, the main thing as a seller is whether the buyer has a mortgage contingency, because until they get their mortgage, you're not in a firm contract. If you're selling a co-op, if they have board approval, you're not in a firm contract until they get board approval. So they can get the return of your deposit. But once those contingencies have met, then the next step is scheduling the closing. So scheduling your closing. So now I tell clients, the seller's part of it is you're roughly, for a house, I'm scheduling with 7 different parties. Well, 5 different parties. With a co-op, I'm scheduling with maybe 7 different parties. And then with a condo, the same thing with the house. So imagine trying to get all these people the same day, the same time, scheduled. It can be a nightmare. I wish I was like a scheduler in another life. I'm like, I finally got everybody for one day and time. And then there's the one person that comes in and says, hey, I can't make it. So to make it easier for the seller side, especially during this time of COVID, I tell clients, you can give me as your attorney power of attorney to close, or we can have you pre-sign the closing documents if we know the closing is coming up. So we try to make it easier for you as a seller. If you're moving, you want to make sure that I have a client that they moved out of state. So I had them give us power of attorney prior to them leaving the state because it's harder for them to get documents notarized. So you want to make sure you have a conversation with your attorney about, do you actually want to be there at the closing? You don't necessarily, maybe, you know, it's great to be there, turn over the keys, but you may not actually, you don't really necessarily need to be there, especially in person during this time period. You can give your attorney the documents, just arrange for keys to be handed over. Vacating the premises. Your standard contract says closing date, the property is delivered vacant and broom clean, which means you moved all of your furniture, you moved out, and the property is vacant. So you turn over the keys. And they have to do a walkthrough. Contract says between 24 to 48 hours prior to closing. So that means 24 to 48 hours prior to your closing, you have to be out. Your property has to be vacant. So that's what also you want to take into consideration. If you're buying and selling at the time, then we definitely have a conversation with your attorney regarding putting in clauses that you're able to stay in possession for a couple of days, and the walkthroughs are done in different parts, in different steps, and money's held back to make sure that you move out in time and nothing is damaged. Your walkthrough is very important. You want to make sure that you don't damage anything during the property, during your move out. You want to make sure that the condition when they saw the property, let's say 3 months ago, 2 or 3 months ago, is the same condition that when they're coming through their walkthrough, because you don't want to have that as an issue holding up your closing as a seller. You know, is the washing machine broken? Is the stove not working? Did you, you know, put a hole in the wall because you're taking down that flat screen TV? Those type of things, you know, small things, but you're moving and you never think about that. And as a buyer coming in, this is their last opportunity to check the property. So they can be very, you know, they can pick up on different things. And as a seller, you don't want to have any issues coming up that would adjourn your closing. So you want to give yourself enough time to do that.
Okay, now I get to open it up for any questions that we didn't cover. I think that we didn't go over, you know, Zoom virtual closings for book co-op board interviews. A lot of
I think
that's
that's more for
happening
the
right
seller,
now.
the buyer
It's
side.
more for the buyer, but just,
Yeah.
you know, making sure you know if your co-op's meeting, how they're meeting. Being familiar with that is always important as a seller if you are in a co-op. But it's open for questions now. Whoever wants to ask away, you have us. Off the
So
clock.
one thing for sellers, I would say you're signing things electronically now. You're getting wires for your funds. So you also want to make sure that your, you know, bank accounts and things like that, always verifying any information with your attorney. When you're signing documents, you don't necessarily need to meet in person with your attorney to sign, but you should definitely go over the contract to make sure you understand all of the representations that you're making. Noise issues, bed bug issues. If you're selling a condo or a co-op, there's lots of representations in the contract that deal with that. So if there's issues that have come up in the last 12 months or so, you want to let your realtor know, let your attorney know, so that they know how to handle it and frame it in the contract of sale.
I had a question about the brokers for sellers and for buyers. Can you tell me like what they typically charge?
So there's no set fees in New York. It depends a lot on your relationship with the broker, if you've worked with them in the past, and the challenges of your property. The seller pays both the buyer and the seller's broker. That's how we have it set up here in New York. So if you were selling your property and you were offering 6%, which has been known to be a percentage that is commonly used, you would be giving 3% to the buyer's broker and 3% to the seller's broker.
Okay. You know, one question I had was, I've worked with the broker and I've also made an offer direct. Then I also have a neighbor who told me about like some of these buyer brokers that offer rebates. I don't know if you have any thoughts about them, you know, and how they compare to working with a traditional buyer broker.
I mean, so I would say in the times of COVID, you want somebody that has a lot of experience, that they've been doing this a long time, and that are going to get you through all of the, you know, help you avoid all the missteps that somebody that without experience might do. So I haven't had good experiences with any of those sites that offer discounted services. And from speaking to the clients that use them, I felt that one person had never met their person that represented them that did that. And I think it made it really challenging to be involved in those deals for me anyway. Like I said, for all the reasons before, just being on the same team and we're working together, and that person needing to be available as a stand-in for the buyers to physically show up at appointments, and they weren't available to do that. So I would say sort of the old-fashioned saying, you get what you pay for.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've made unsuccessful bids direct, and I also used a buyer's broker. It seems like the seller's broker does a lot more work though.
Buyer's brokers do a ton of work. They are your coach, they are your advocate. You need the right one to represent you because they are going to fight for you and help you get the property that you want. You just need to, this is a job. I'm not advocating for myself. This is a job. If you were going to hire somebody to put on salary at your company and start giving them all these benefits, and you wanted them to do all of your social media and increase your social media by double, you would interview people for this and then pick the best person that had the experience and skill set to do exactly the thing that you wanted to happen. And so you should interview brokers like it is their job, because that's what you're hiring them for, and pick the person that not only is going to do a good job, but that you also like and trust and want to spend a lot of time with, because if they're doing their job correctly, they will be on the phone with you, coaching you through this process and helping you decide if this is the right property and what you should offer, and is this your A property, your B property, are you willing to make concessions, and getting you across the finish line.
Yeah, I mean, what is the buyer, because my experience with the buyer's broker is, I identified the property myself and I went there, and then, I got through a referral, a buyer's broker to work with me, and she helped me present the package like the way that you're saying, like, this is my lawyer, I can get to the finish line, here's all my pre-approvals. So they helped me with all of that. But I just don't know on the buying side, once the seller looks at, they just go with the biggest number in the bidding war contest.
I don't encourage my sellers to do that. Just the number. I'm going to tell you, if you're selling your house don't pick the broker that gives you the biggest number to sell your house, because we're all looking at the same comps. They're just telling you that number to actually get the listing. So that's like one red flag there about picking a selling broker. But for a buyer's broker, yeah, they're going to put all the paperwork together. But if they are, I don't know, I have such a really good rapport with other brokers, so that when I call and I say I have a deal and I give them the logistics of what's going on and the straightforward talk that I like to always work within, I have that relationship already, and they know what I've done in the past with them, and they know how it is to work with me. So they're going to, might say yes to working with me over somebody that they don't know and doesn't have the experience and isn't straightforward. So I think that who you pick is important. It's not just about representing the offer. It's about making sure you present the offer that they're going to say yes to. And it's not always the highest number. It's the offer that the timeline, that they fit in if you're in a co-op, it's like, is the co-op board going to say yes to them? Do they fit into my building? Are they going to be good neighbors?
I guess I'm looking at properties that, are houses. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of those variables, I understand there's probably a whole other dimension to the work that the buyer's broker has to do when it's a co-op. But when I was just looking at houses, I felt like it results in these bidding wars, and that the seller maybe just looks at the numbers, because everything else I said, I wrote them a personal letter. I said I would accommodate them on any timing. I was, going to make this earnest money deposit down.
And you had a broker when you made this offer?
Yeah. And she just said to me, our relationship lasted like less than a week, it was just to make this offer. And she just said to me, oh, I think they're going to get something higher. And they did. And I was second in the bid. I was a backup, but that's what happened.
And she said, I think they're going to get something higher, and didn't encourage you to raise your offer?
She did. But I didn't feel comfortable. And also, like you included in your presentation, all the closing costs. I didn't learn that until the day I had to make, the process was, they had an open house. They got 3 offers and they were at the same number. So they said, okay, in 48 hours, you have to give your best and final, right? You see that scenario happen, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So they did that, and it was only on that day I learned about all these closing costs. They were going to be like $50,000. And I guess, in hindsight, maybe I regretted it, but, coming off learning all that at once.
But that's why I always encourage buyers to, that was probably a property you really wanted, and that as you're looking to put in an offer on property that maybe you don't really want, so you can go through the exercise of learning about what it's going to be like, so that when the right property comes, that you're ready, willing, and able to get there. So if she had told you that it wasn't going to be the number to make the deal, and you didn't feel comfortable, she advised you to raise your offer if you really wanted this property, but you weren't there yet. And so if it was the first thing you were really making an offer on, and you didn't have a long relationship with her, it was only for a week, and you didn't educated about closing costs, just sounds like you picked someone last minute to fill the gap, but really it's a relationship. So having somebody jump in last minute isn't going to serve you.
Yeah, but I'm a person who looks closely at what's on the market, and I'm good at identifying properties myself.
Okay.
I get 1 million emails a day from Zillow and StreetEasy, so on that piece of it, I feel fairly educated.
So does everybody, but but you didn't. Everybody gets all the listings. It's the person that has the education and the broker that's going to get them to the finish line. No, everybody has access to the same listings. So you're just like every other buyer, but every other buyer has a real estate agent, right? And has a long relationship with them that they know and trust and are going to work with them and advise them through the process.
Yeah.
I think that you should pick somebody that you like and build a relationship with them that's going to last longer than a week. So when they're giving you advice, you trust them, because it's built on trust also, right?
Well, my process was just like I said, I made only 2 offers in the last 2 months, and I liked both houses very much. And the first one I went in direct, which I know that's rare, right? It's uncommon that people do that.
Say that again.
I bid direct.
Went in direct. I would say that I wouldn't pick a direct deal during honestly. There's offers that come in, even if it was more money, I wouldn't be working with an unrepresented buyer during these times. It's just, there's too many challenges, and I cannot advise that person, because I represent the seller, on what they need to do to get over these hurdles, and their lawyer really isn't going to do that either. So I would not pick a direct deal over, if it was the only deal that was coming in, then I'd have to figure out how to work with it, but I would encourage the sellers to pick somebody that was represented.
Okay. No, I mean, I hear that, and the second one was just I identified the property, and I had no prior relationship with this broker, so it just started there. But,
right.
I mean, by the way, you see a lot of bidding wars occur still?
Yeah, 100%. We've been both, Rashida too, you've been seeing bidding wars.
Yeah,
right?
I would say that I tell clients that as a seller and a buyer, until the contract is signed by both parties and actually signed by the seller and returned to the buyer, either party can walk out of the transaction, can cancel, and not move forward. So even as a seller, a buyer, they're doing their due diligence or they're doing their inspection, doesn't necessarily mean that you have a firm offer. So I've had clients that are selling and they have the property, they're waiting for the due diligence to be completed, or it's a house and they're waiting for the buyer to complete their inspection, and the property's off of the market for that week or so as the contract is negotiated. And then the buyer decides to change their mind. They don't like the inspection results or something like that. And now you've lost a week as a seller or 2 weeks with the property off of the market. So that's also where you do see bidding wars as well, where we try to say, okay, you have a time frame to return a signed contract. As a seller, you can put that down there depending on how the market is and how quickly you want to get into contract. And you have multiple buyers say, hey, I have multiple buyers, I've done a best and final, and we expect contracts signed within a week. So if it's a condo or condo co-op, you may want to hire a different, longer time period. But as a seller, yeah, you can, there's bidding wars, and as a buyer as well, there's bidding wars. And unfortunately in New York, until it's fully signed, either party can back out of the transaction. There was a question about the appraisal as a seller. So this, since people are looking to sell, two parts of your contract is contingent is they're getting a mortgage, and then there's title, which means that you have the right to sell the property. There's no issues on the title of the property or judgments or violations. But one of the main things is that mortgage contingency. As a seller, hopefully your realtor has, priced it right, so it's not over, or it's not, it's not over the price that other properties in the neighborhood is going for. So there's not going to be an appraisal issue, but the bank has to appraise for the property. And your contract states that if the buyer isn't able to get their mortgage within typically 30 to 45 days, they have a right to cancel the contract and get the return of their deposit. No penalty, no questions asked. They got a denial. They can cancel the contract. And part of that denial is that it has to appraise. So if they're getting 80% financing or 90% financing, it has to appraise for that purchase price in order for them to get that certain amount. As a seller, I've had it recently, actually last week, where the appraisal came in roughly $40,000 less than the purchase price. And it became a negotiation. The seller, I was representing the seller. The buyers our bank isn't giving us the financing for the full 80% because it appraised for $40,000 less. We don't have that extra money to come up with, so can you lower the price to match the appraisal? It's negotiated. The seller can say, no, I'm not going to lower the price, and I'll take it off. Here's your down payment back, and we'll put it back on the market. The seller, they're ready. They want to sell. It's been off of the market for 30 to 45 days already. They're ready to move. So then it becomes let's see, can we lower it to the price, or can we meet them halfway? In this situation, we were able to negotiate it where the seller came down half, the buyer came down half, and they were able to still, we end up amending the contract price. And the buyer ended up getting a slightly higher mortgage or getting funds from another situation, but they're still able to proceed. But the appraisal is a part of your contract. And as a seller, you have to understand that. We've had contingencies where a seller says at minimum it has to, a buyer wants to they may want the buyer not to have an appraisal contingency. And the buyer says, well, at minimum it has to appraise for this. So this comes in where there's bidding wars. And it's, went over 100,000 more than what they were asking for. And you're like, well, it may not appraise for that, but I can give you an appraisal contingency if at minimum it appraises for this, because I know you can come up with that extra funds. So we negotiate those terms into the contract. So to answer the question on when can a seller pull out of the deal, really it's only if, once you sign a contract as a seller, unless the buyer is not able to get their mortgage, you don't have a right to cancel the contract. Unless there's a title issue, you don't have a right to cancel the contract. So you are selling your property once those contingencies are met. If those contingencies are met, you can cancel. If they're met, you can't cancel. If they're not met, you can cancel. So you have to be in the position that you're ready to sell your property when you sign that contract.
Rashida,
Mm-hmm.
how often do you find the failure to get the right appraisal occurs?
Really hasn't been recently it hasn't happened a lot, but as I said, it's because I think some of the properties are being it's being, these bidding wars. So I'm seeing more of the sellers coming in with the provisions that at minimum we want to have an appraisal contingency for this. So as I said, recently we just had that with an appraisal issue, but it wasn't a lot, but now I think it maybe start coming in because of these kind of overbidding of properties and the value. If you didn't account to when you put it on the market, you accounted for a cushion. But if you didn't and you're right and they're overbidding it like 100,000 more, it may not appraise.
Any other questions? Well, it's after 5. We've been talking for an hour, but happy to answer any questions, or we can follow up offline directly if you need be. I don't sell outside of Brooklyn, but Rashida does real estate all over the state of New York and New Jersey, actually. So if you're thinking about moving to Jersey. And I'm happy, though, if you want to talk, even if I'm not going to be a potential broker for you, I'm happy to talk to you about the challenges of your property and what you're thinking. And I can refer you to somebody else or just give you some guidance on how to find a broker that will work for you. So if you want more of my time, I'm happy to give it. It's challenging times for all of us right now, and these are big decisions, and you should definitely get gather as much advice and education as you can as you go into all of this. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today. It was a really interesting conversation, that's for sure. And I enjoyed talking to all of you. Are you guys leaving?
Thank you so much. Thank you both.
Bye, guys.
If you
Thank
need
you.
anything, please reach out. Good luck with everything. Everybody stay
Thank
safe.
you.
Enjoy the rest
Okay,
of
you
your
too.
evening.
You.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thanks, Rashida.
Thanks, Rashida.